begin, and the program always begins with Mary. Would you like to introduce our speaker?
Absolutely. Hello,
Thank you.
everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce Yvette Holmes, who is the VP of Resource Development and Partnerships in DHIC Inc. And DHIC, it was formerly called Downtown Housing Improvement Corporation, that was established in 1974. So Yvette, as I mentioned, is the Vice President of Resource Development and Partnerships for this organization. And it's a Raleigh-based nonprofit that focuses on creating, preserving affordable housing opportunities for seniors, families, and individuals in our community. She cares deeply about these issues that impact women, children, and families. And she has over 30 years of experience um, as a nonprofit administrator, fundraiser, and communications, public and civic engagement specialist. So she knows what she's doing. Yvette also was a co-project manager for the Washington Terrace redevelopment project. And I remember that many, many years ago, Yvette, when I was a probation parole officer for Wake County. And so I was very familiar with Washington Terrace, and it was great to see the redevelopment project. And she's also been a member of the visioning team responsible for the Beacon site, the purpose-built community, both located in Southeast Raleigh. So a lot of great development in Southeast Raleigh. She's also served as a co-chair for 2 local housing bond committees, and she played an integral part in the most recent housing bond, 80 million housing bond that was passed by the people of Wake County. She currently, next slide. She currently serves on the Southeast Raleigh YMCA Board of Advisors. YMCA is a great, great organization, as well as the Southeast Raleigh Promise Board. Maybe she can talk to that a little bit. She attended Morgan State University, majoring in computer science, and she holds a BA degree in business administration from William Peace University. So at this time, please welcome Yvette Holmes, and we look forward to your presentation, Yvette.
Thank you for that warm introduction. It's always humbling when you hear someone else talk about, you know, or read the bio you gave them, right? So I'm like, wow, Yvette, I really appreciate it and humbled by that introduction. And thank you, Mary. It was great talking to you personally early on today, and nice seeing all these warm faces on the screen. I think, is Robin still on the call, or did she jump off? Okay, there you are. Hey. So Robin said, you know, and when I introduced her early on, she reminded me that Susan Botts, Suzanne, is that Susan or Suzanne Botts? I don't know.
It's Suzanne.
Suzanne is the one who invited me, and but she's joining in her stead. And so you should also know my other big announcement is that I just got braces 2 days ago. And so if I like perch my lips a certain kind of way or sound a little odd, it's because I'm still kind of getting used to it all. I can say this because there are only women on the call, right? So I try to put some lip gloss on and I couldn't even blot my lips, you know, so I'm going to get through this and probably humor myself in the process. So be patient with me. So welcome to all the Rotarians. Earlier, before I got on the call, Mary gave me an overview of just, I was like, who am I talking to exactly? You know, and she shared more with me about the group and the work that you do. So congratulations to you for doing good work or staying in good trouble, right? And so I'm going to do my best to tell you a little bit about the affordable housing bond. And I do have a presentation that I will attempt to pull up. And I think that you'll give me permission to share my screen.
I think you have it already, but if
yes. Okay, I'll pull that up. And before I do that, I just want to make sure you all know that though I am here representing the bond and sharing more information about the bond, I am not a City of Raleigh employee. And so there are going to be questions that you might ask me that I would not dare, probably be safe that I not respond for that reason. And I can give you my opinion maybe, but I try to be very careful about how I represent the information, because at the end of the day, I'm not here necessarily representing the City of Raleigh. And so, as already said, I am the Vice President of Resource Development at DHIC, and we are the largest nonprofit developer of affordable housing here in the Triangle. We have over 45 properties in our portfolio, about 2,700 units, serving well over 4,000 individuals, 1,000 of which are school-age children. We also have the DHIC Homeownership Center, where we help first-time home buyers access and get to the closing table and purchase their first home. We all know and hopefully agree that one way in which you can build wealth is through homeownership. We also provide financial education. So someone asked if I knew Sandra Collins, and yes, I do. And so we work with community partners, folk who work at banks, financial institutions, and the like, just to make sure that we're able to help people access homeownership, as I mentioned earlier. We also are strong on our resident services program. We understand housing plus services. We just can't talk about housing alone, that we are serving very vulnerable populations, particularly our seniors. And the whole idea is to ensure that our seniors can age in place and live as long as they want to independently. And oftentimes as we get older, as I'm finding out too, we sometimes need a little help in that space to do. And so we partner with Resources for Seniors. I don't know if you are familiar with that local nonprofit, but they do great work. So they help us serve our residents. So I'll pull up my screen. Let's see, let's go back. Let me do one thing real quick. And then it will say share my screen. I'm learning this technology. Isn't this all fun? Like, what would we have done if we didn't have it, right? Let's see if it's let me do that. And I tell people, because I'm probably going to try to minimize, if you need to interrupt me, just go ahead and take yourself off of mute and just holler at me. Okay. Move this over here. Okay, so today, again, sharing more about the City of Raleigh Affordable Housing Bond. And if I may just give you a quick overview of what the bond entailed. And I am speaking from a presentation that we put together prior to the passing of the bond. So the bond, as you all know, if we've been keeping up with the news, did successfully pass on November 3rd. So some of the language as it reads might seem a little outdated, but the information and content for the most part is pretty current. So the City of Raleigh did put forth an $80 million affordable housing bond, which was placed on the November 3rd ballot. The bond overwhelmingly passed by about 70 or so percentage points. I tell people, everyone's like, don't be nervous, Yvette, the bond's gonna pass. I was like, it's not about it just passing. It's about it overwhelmingly passing. And so I think we met that threshold. And so it did pass. It was only voted on by Raleigh residents because it is just going to impact in terms of the taxes, those who are property owners in the city limits. Property tax increase will result for the $80 million bond in about $20 per home value or property value of $255,000, median home value. We expect the $80 million bond to preserve or create over 1,700 units. Starting in July 2021 which is when the bond proceeds will be available, and it will serve thereout from 5 to 7 years and support projects over the next 5 to 7 years. And the bond will serve and create housing opportunities, a variety of housing choices and opportunities for individuals, families, and seniors, to include those at 30% AMI. income. And I will share a little bit more about that because this year, for those who were keeping up with all the discussion, there was a great emphasis placed on those who have a greater need for affordable housing, and particularly accessing those choices in our community. So there was Affordable Housing Bond Advisory Committee that was put together at the start of 2020. It's hard to believe that we're almost going to be saying 2021. Seems like it was so long ago. But in the start of 2020, City Council, under the guise of Mayor Baldwin, put together an Affordable Housing Bond Advisory Committee. I was asked to serve as one of the co-chairs of that advisory group. I cannot tell you that when I said yes, that I knew there was going to be a COVID-19, because we didn't know in January that there would be. I also did not know that it was going to get a little rough, I guess, as the months went on in terms of some opposition. And I'll talk about that a little bit as I go through the process. But I will tell you a little history on that. You know, back in 2019, the former council was also interested in putting forth an affordable housing bond. And I think at that time it was $57 million, but they had not allowed themselves enough time to do a community engagement process and to go through the steps needed to get that bond on the ballot in 2019. So the bond, and at the time they were thinking not only for about a affordable housing bond, but also a parks bond. And so when the new council was elected, they took up the two issues of the bond, the parks and the housing bond. And then fast forward to 2020, when COVID-19 hit, they dropped the parks bond and stayed committed to the affordable housing bond. Just a little history there. And so when the advisory board was put together, it was 24 of us, 24 members, and it was a mix of individuals from the community. I know there was some questions about there were not people on this advisory group who had lived experience. And I think those are just terms sometimes that when, you know, for me personally, I kind of feel like you don't know who's had lived experience, right? You don't know who in their past have ever struggled with homelessness or been housing insecure. People don't always come to the table bearing their story. And I understand what people were asking, but I also felt like you have to give the group an opportunity, in that we were charged with this idea of taking what the council had already put together. They came up with recommendations on what they wanted to see in a bond. They wanted us to share that information out to the community. Again, us not knowing that a COVID-19 would be awaiting us. So we held a series of meetings in light of COVID-19, decided that we would pivot, and had to pivot because we couldn't meet in person. And we definitely were not using Zoom like we're using it today. You know, now everything's virtual and everybody's doing breakout groups and what have you. We were not that savvy back in March and April. And so we had these series of meetings, ultimately conducted a survey, an e-survey, had over 4,800 responses to that. We advertised and promoted that survey broadly, posted it in the Carolinian, and did some targeted outreach to audience that obviously may not always feel comfortable doing electronic surveys. But we also had a number in which people could call in and call to the city and give their survey responses online. Ultimately, we made our final recommendation in May. Just to give you an example of a list of those who served on that advisory group, some names hopefully you remember. The group primarily were, you know, the members that consisted here were those who, in my mind, a lot of nonprofits that serve those who are most impacted, right? Those who do have lived experiences. And a lot of nonprofits that have, you know, credibility and who do this work day in and day out. And as I told the group from the beginning, I said, you know, your job and our job, representing those who do have lived experience, is to bring that experience to the table. And if we can't come to this meeting and represent their interests, then we don't even need to be a part of the group. So everyone felt comfortable doing that. We also had some other community members. We did have a couple of residents who live in some affordable housing, and I won't point them out because I don't think that's important to do. Just to give you an example as to my point that I just made about some of the nonprofits, and you can tell the population that they serve there. I'm sure these are all nonprofits that you're familiar with. This same group of nonprofits also formed the Wake Affordable Housing Coalition. And so these nonprofits have been meeting since, in addition to some others, have been meeting since last year. And we have kind of formalized, and now we're meeting on an ongoing basis in that we've come together around the bond. We have found it useful and beneficial for us to have a voice collectively in this space. And so we will continue to meet. So to what the bond package as was presented to the advisory group. So the council really had done this work. As a matter of fact, this is a continuation of the work that started in 2019. They came back and say, here, you know, this is the bond package that we want to submit. Their recommendation at the time was for $75 million. Ultimately, we agreed to $80 million, and that was after we went out and talked to the community, and particularly the information that we gleaned from the e-survey. We had recommended on the e-survey and asked the question to the participants, will you support a bond at $50 million, at $75 million, at $100 million, and at every clip, every level, we had a high response and favorable response rate. So what we did, because we were in the midst of a pandemic, obviously, and being considerate of the financial times, we didn't shoot for the $100 million, though the survey indicated that the community would have supported it. We decided to go an inch up above what the council initially proposed and landed on $80 million. And so the buckets, as we call them, as they were presented to us, that's what we refer to them as. I know some people was like, well, why do you have to call them buckets? Because that's what they call them. And it just makes sense and easy to follow along. And so the first bucket, as you see there, is the transit-oriented site acquisition bucket. I will tell you that the council, when they presented their proposal to us, they had different percentages per bucket. And some of the work of the advisory group, and it was per the input of the nonprofits, is that they wanted to see a different allocation of percentages across the different buckets. They wanted to see more money in certain areas, and I'll speak to that in a minute. So the transit-oriented site acquisition bucket, really $16 million will be allocated for those activities. And essentially, it is just to look at those transit corridors that have already been identified by the city for the bus rapid transit, the BRT routes. New Bern Avenue is one, for instance. Western Boulevard is another. The South Saunders corridor is another. And to look at what opportunities exist there along those corridors to preserve or create affordable housing. And obviously, what you have to really do is go in and acquire the land. The land's not cheap. And land is what drives the cost of developing affordable housing. If you can't get the land, if you can't minimize your costs, be it through land and construction and labor and the like, then you can't pass those cost savings on in rents. So it's a numbers game. So everybody's like, well, why does it take so long and cost so much? It's just because it costs, like I tell people, it's not cheap to develop affordable housing, because you're really trying to get those rents to the level that people can afford them. And the only way you can do that is by eliminating or minimizing the debt that you carry on that particular project or development. And so transit-oriented site acquisitions, people have asked me, can't we know where those sites are? And I don't know where the sites are, so I don't have that information to share. But I also will say that if the city were to make that public more broadly, prematurely, they would get priced out. Some other deep pocket investor would just come in and buy up the land, and because they think the city now is going to want to buy it from them at some point. So some things you can't be too transparent about, and that would be a good example of when it's probably best just to be quiet and wait until the appropriate time comes. And then the public-private partnership bucket, this is where the nonprofits wanted to see more resources or allocation of the funds be dedicated. And when you think about public-private partnerships, I do understand that there are people who feel like the big developers, the market developers are going to come in and swoop up all the money and help with their market rate. And that is just not going to happen. And you know, if that happens, then I have to come back and apologize. But the bond is to develop and preserve and create affordable housing and not market housing. And so the public-private partnerships will help with what we call small scale affordable housing. Those projects that are like fewer than 30 or 20 units, a triplex, a duplex. You have like nonprofits like Families Together that they go in and do like single site acquisitions and single site or like, you know, multifamily acquisitions so that they can house their families that are experiencing homelessness. And you'll see a greater, what you would call results sooner, because like when you start doing tax credits, it takes years to develop tax credit properties. But in a public-private partnership, you could potentially have a nonprofit come in and ask for funding to help acquire certain properties, like again, multiplex units and the like. LIHTC, or what we call low income housing tax credit, is gap financing. That's what DHIC primarily specializes in, you know, the tax credits, 9% and 4% deals, gap financing. The city already does this, so that's not new for them. They're just creating more resources to provide funding for those projects. The homeowner rehab program, the city also has that program currently, and it is just to help folk who are of low income, who are homeowners, afford those repairs that are needed so that they can live and stay and remain in their homes. You have people over the years who probably have sold their homes prematurely because they couldn't afford the roof repair or some major system repair. And so this will provide additional resources to help with that. And then down payment assistance goes to what I mentioned earlier for first-time homeowners. We know the cost of buying a home has increased astronomically, that we are living in really a community where everybody seems like they want to come to Raleigh and Wake County. Obviously, that's going to cause the price of homes to go up. And that's putting that further out of reach for people who already have very modest incomes. So the DPA helps to write down the cost of the home so that individuals can move into and secure first-time homeownership. This is a further explanation of those buckets, and I'll just touch on a couple of things here. As I mentioned, the site acquisition, you know, by the city really had to go back. The community's like, we want to know where are these units coming, how are they going to be developed, and what categories. So the city staff put together this projection of where they think those units will be developed. And you see here some of those examples and what they propose they will spend per unit, average cost per unit, they being the city. NOAA properties, those naturally occurring affordable housing communities, those NOAA properties, or what we consider NOAA properties, don't have subsidy tied to them in any form. They're just like older properties that over the years, they've aged, you know, the rents are naturally low. But now that it's a hot real estate market, easily an investor or the owner could just put in some new cabinets and flooring and countertops and, you know, double up on the rent. And so the whole idea is to go to those owners and incentivize them to maintain the property as affordable. And the county has done a good job in trying to inventory those properties. And so the city obviously wants to play in that space as well. And so under the private partnership, I mentioned some examples for the small scale affordable housing. Also, the city wants to partner with the county to do a permanent supportive housing, at least 50 units. That is an expensive model. The permanent supportive housing in this case would be to help to house individuals or who would be considered you know, frequent users of the other public services that we have, like unfortunately the jails and the, you know, emergency rooms and the like, who are kind of cycling through those services. And the idea is if you can get them successfully housed, you can save money across the board, but also you can get them in a better position where they are you know, strong and able to achieve their goals as they've set out for themselves. And so that is a model that the city and the county will partner on. It's similar to the Oak City Cares facility that they opened up over on Wilmington Street. And then going down to the rental development, I already talked about that. The gap financing for LIHTC deals and first-time homeowners. I would tell you each category has some restrictions or requirements, should I say, for serving those at 30% AMI. And I will get to that. So I mentioned earlier, the whole conversation that kind of bubbled up around the affordable housing bond this year was about, there were some who wanted to see the entire $80 million go to support those who are at 40 and 30% AMI, area median income. So we have households who make very little, you know, 10 bucks an hour. And if they had to shop for housing in this marketplace, there really are not many units for those individuals in those households that have that income level. And so people were like, well, why can't we just dedicate the $80 million to those who need it the most? And so when we think about housing affordability in our space, you think about it in terms of, you can have a millionaire and they could be cost burden, meaning only to say that they've paid more than 30% of their income on household costs, be it their mortgage, rent, plus utilities. The difference between a millionaire that's cost burden and somebody that's making $10 an hour that's cost burden is the choices are different. The millionaire might just decide they're not going to buy that fancy boat, whereby somebody at 10 bucks an hour is having to decide whether or not they're going to eat or be able to afford their medications. So the choices are more extreme. So people, when we talk about being cost burden, paying more than 30%, and you're extremely cost burden if you're paying more than 50% of your income on your household costs. This is just an example of the income limits for 2020 based on household size. So if you're one person household of at 30% AMI, your income can go up to $19,000. That is not that you can have somebody that's 15,000. Somebody that's at, you know, 10,000. And then it goes up from there and it's adjusted based on household size. So you can, you know, be a two-person household at 30%, and that limit, as you see there, is 22,000. And this is to give you an idea as a counter, just to let you see what potentially the rent limits are for 2020 as set forth by HUD as well. You know, person at a 30% household for a one bedroom ideally should not be paying any more than $378 for their rent. So you understand the pressure, right? So where are you going to find rent for $378? I don't know where. That's the problem. Okay. When I'm telling you a little bit about Raleigh Housing Authority, we have two local housing authorities. There's a Wake Housing Authority, and then there's the Raleigh Housing Authority, and Raleigh Housing Authority is probably more known than that of Wake. We went back and did a little sampling of some of the properties or developments that the city of Raleigh has funded over the years, or at least the last couple of years. And there was some pushback in the community that Raleigh, in all of its funding of its various projects over the last several years, has not funded enough units to serve those at 30% AMI. And that is true. The data did show that there were fewer than 100 units, okay? But when you go back and you actually look at who's living in the units, you have to factor in those who are served through the local housing authorities. Because in the local housing authorities, if you have what you see the last bullet point there, those who have access to the housing choice voucher, which allows them to go into the general marketplace and shop for their housing, those households by and large are 30% households. So when we start saying the 30% households aren't being served, they are being served. Could they be served more? Yes, they could be served more. But I think it's important, we thought it was important to let the community know that, and matter of fact, those with the voucher are in a better position than those who don't have the voucher. Because if with the voucher, if you're a 30% household, you have a way to pay that higher rent. You know, you have a way to subsidize, or your voucher subsidize that rent, subsidizes the rent for you. And whereby someone who's at 30% who would not have a voucher or doesn't have a voucher, they don't have a way to pay that higher rent. They don't have a way to pay a rent, period. And so I think we just need to make those distinctions and help the community better understand and be educated about it all. You can see that, does it say here, the waiting list for public housing is over 4,100 names and another 6,500 for that choice voucher, just to give you an idea who, you know, why the wheels are slow turning. Here so to serve the 30% AMI population, and I'm getting ready to close out, I think I only have a couple more slides. What the city council did in response to the input from the community, because again, people are like, we're not going to support this if we can't see where those who need it the most are going to be served. And so the city went back and created some policy guidelines and directed the staff to include in the guidelines that if you come in and if you're a developer and you're going to come in and you want to request funding from the city of Raleigh, whether it be from the bond pool, whether it be from the federal dollars that the city gets, whatever, that your project that you're presenting, if you're using 9% tax credits, for instance, 25% of those units must target those at 30% AMI. If you're applying and, you know, advancing a 4% tax credit deal, then 10% of those units have to be set aside for those at 30% AMI. And you ask why the difference? Because 4% deals don't generate as much revenue or equity, and it's going to cost, the city will have to contribute more to make up for that gap. And so they're requiring fewer units for the 4% deals, but on the 9% deals, they want to see at least 25% of those units set aside. In the public-private partnership, they have also set aside some requirements. We know that those in the chronically homeless individual who are experiencing chronic homelessness, we know for the most part, they will serve those at 30% AMI or lower. For the nonprofits, if we're a developer, nonprofit or otherwise, if you come in and you want to make use of these funds, you need to have a third of those units set aside for those at 30% AMI. And so, you know, that makes the numbers hard to, you know, it's hard to make them work, but that's what they're going to have to do if they want to make use of these funds. And no more than a third of those units can be set aside for those at 80%. So for those who are concerned as to whether or not the higher income folk will be able to take advantage of them, it's just not to say that you can't, it's just that they're requiring the developers to have a good income mix. And then every developer coming in requesting the funds, they must accept the housing choice voucher. So it's not a requirement of a private landlord now to accept any, you know, they don't have to accept all forms of payment. So if they didn't want to accept the housing choice voucher, there's nothing discriminatory about that. But if you're going to use the city of Raleigh's funds, you will have to accept the housing choice voucher. So I know there's some conversation about some big developments that were recently approved and some concern that they were going to come in and take advantage of the bond proceeds and the like. And the thing is, if they want to take advantage of the bond proceeds because they want to make affordable housing or mix affordable housing in their unit mix with market rate housing, which is really a hard model to make work, they're going to have to accept the housing choice voucher. And so the housing bond campaign, there was another committee that was put together to market the campaign. I was one of 4 chairs of that. It was just really a carryover from the original advisory committee that started at the beginning of the year for continuity. I was asked to be one of the chairs. It was facilitated by the Chamber of Commerce here in Raleigh. And we were responsible for marketing and educating the campaign, educating the community about the campaign. And so that committee, that was a screen to give that committee acknowledgement for their efforts. And I don't know that I did a particularly good job because I didn't list all their names. But thank you for voting yes to the bond on Tuesday, November 3rd. As I said, it did pass, and it was really because of all of you, if you live in the city of Raleigh, those who supported it, the league who gave us opportunity to come and share information and make a presentation similar to this, and the other coalitions and nonprofits and the like, just people understanding the real importance. And I will say that this wasn't really about, this was about creating another dedicated resource so that we can work collectively as a city of Raleigh to advance our affordable housing goals. I will promise you that the $80 million is a drop in the bucket compared to the need. So we still have work to do, and this was just a great start to all of that work. So thank you, and I'm happy to open this up for questions. I do want to share, if I may, if it'll let me do that, share one document that I am happy to pass on to you. I told you that our Wake Affordable Housing Coalition, in our efforts to advocate and educate the community about the bond, put together what we call an FAQ. And it has some commonly asked questions and answers, hopefully makes for an easy reference when you're talking about the bond. Better than the PowerPoint in some instances, given who you're sharing information with. And I'm happy to, if I hadn't already, happy to make this FAQ available to you all. So I'm going to conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Lynette. Yvette.
I'll answer that. That's
Sorry.
Okay.
I have a friend who is Lynette, and I keep
It's
in my
okay.
mind doing that. My apologies.
It's okay.
This is a very informative presentation, and I think really gave us a better understanding and appreciation of affordable housing in general, and what the bond has done for that. I know there are a couple of questions in there. Marie, are you gonna, or Chris, are you gonna do the question?
I can do the questions.
Okay.
You have a kudos. There's lots of kudos for you. Very nice. My question just happens to be first, do you work with self-help, the group self-help, any kind of financing with them?
Yes, we, matter of fact, we're in partnership with Self-Help on our Durham project currently, Willage Apartments, downtown development that is soon to open in February. So yes, we do work with Self-Help, and they do finance, at least in this case, is one project that we're working on.
Okay, they're a very interesting group, and if you haven't heard about them, their information is also very important. Mary has a question. Do you have any figures on how successful the permanent supportive housing program has been in impacting homelessness?
I can get some for you. I don't have those at my fingertip right now, but I know, I think it's safe to say that I'm confident in knowing that that model does work. It is an expensive model because of all of the services that you have to deliver on site to those residents. I mean, residents that have other challenges, right? The Moore Place in Charlotte, which matter of fact, I'll just direct you there to Moore Place in Charlotte. I'm told that they just actually bought a hotel there in Charlotte for their house individuals. And I've heard some chatter here in Raleigh that, like, I think I was on a call with the mayor and, like a presentation panel. And she was like, well, why can't we do that here in Raleigh? And I was like, yeah, why can't we do that here in Raleigh? And so I know it's a model that works. I have visited that supportive housing community, and they probably have a wealth of data information there. But that model that you see at Moore Place in Charlotte is the one that they want to replicate here in Raleigh.
Robin has a question. Could bond money be used to help people pay for housing vouchers?
It is my understanding that bond proceeds can only be used for those things tied to a physical asset. And you could argue that the voucher is tied to a physical asset.
Yeah.
But it is not, in the sense that it's not real property. So that's why if you notice all the buckets is about acquisition of land, the development of housing, home ownership, because again, it's tied to an asset. And that is not to say that the city couldn't, from another source of funds, okay, come up with a program. The challenge with programs like that, when you decide, to get into that space, is how you pay for it, how you sustain it, and who gets the voucher. How do you determine who's, eligible for that voucher, because the need is so great. So there could be a process that would even feel like it's fair to one group of people.
Yeah.
So yeah.
When I drive around Durham, there's lots of houses that are boarded up. Is that the kind of housing that you would be looking at to go in, not in Durham, but in Raleigh, to go in and repair and fix up and put people in those houses again?
So the city, when I think that rehab bucket is what you're referring to,
Yeah.
for people who currently live in a home. They have their
Okay.
homeowners and it's owner occupied.
Okay.
That pool is not for the city, as I understand it, to go and acquire those single family sites. I mean, the city, I'm not saying they're not in the business of doing that, but if they were to do it, it probably would be for the purpose for a demolition and new construction kind of thing. Like they're after the land,
Okay.
not necessarily the house itself, if that makes sense.
Well, some of those houses are in very disrepair and probably would need a lot of fixing up money.
Yeah, a private developer, I suppose. I mean, you're talking about Durham. I mean, if they wanted to go and assemble and, it's better suited for a nonprofit to take up that kind of activity. But to go in, because the challenge with that too is that you have to, that's the other thing, the investment that the city makes, they want to see the affordability period extend for 30 years. So you remember when I talked about earlier, like if a private developer wanted to come in, the concerns that people have, like whoever might come in and use this money. Well, if they want to adhere to the terms of 30-year affordability period and take it choice vouchers, and and you're going to produce affordable housing, yeah, we need more developers in that space. So how appealing that is.
Yeah.
But I think that's the safeguard, is just to make sure that whatever we do, that we're not doing this for a short-term flip. We have an investor coming in and, use up the city resources, and then 10 years later, they're cashing out and, on their way to the bank.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions? Oh, yes, Susanna.
Hey,
Suzanne, can you unmute?
Thank you so much, Yvette. I wanted to point out to everyone, Yvette speaks about Wake County in particular, but I was late and I apologize, but her nonprofit, DHIC, works across the whole state, which is one reason I thought she would be a great speaker for us here since our members are apart. But Robin and I are co-chairs of the Affordable Housing Committee for the League of Women Voters. And we are hopeful, after hearing this wonderful presentation, we had a webinar before the bond was passed, and maybe we can have a webinar with this additional information, because in the heat of the election, it was hard to get all this thing together, and it's hard to comment when there's so many parts. We just this week had Raleigh, the downtown South project, where there's a new stadium. It was very controversial. And there is some affordable housing, but I don't know, Yvette, if you commented that the state legislature passed a law that does not require developers to have affordable housing, and maybe you could comment a second about the affordable housing in this new development. It's a long way off, but it's interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. Yeah, so I was trying not to mention the name of that developer. I didn't know where people fell on that side of support. And I know the council just approved the stadium. And so some of the pushback in the community, again, is that it's such a large development. And how many affordable units will be created as part of their unit mix? Let's not fool ourselves. I mean, that's not a development that they're building for, low-income households. And so unfortunately, in the state of North Carolina, there's not inclusionary zoning in kind of mandates that a developer or a local municipality can't mandate that a developer includes affordable housing in their unit mix. So the only way you can get at that is through incentives, or in the case of a zoning case, or, they're looking for a new use where you say a conditional will give you, we'll approve this if you do a set of things. And so we know affordable housing will be a part of this. It probably, given the number of units, and I can't remember the number of thousands of units that they're proposing for this stadium site, there were not enough affordable units calculated or included. And so I think those numbers will probably still be negotiable. And I would tell you, because again, the best way to pay for affordable housing on a large scale multifamily is using the tax credit program that I mentioned earlier, and that is administered by the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, and is highly competitive. And if you don't have that source of funding, there really is no other good way of paying for it, unless you do get a developer who's willing to come to the table in a somewhat philanthropic way. So, we'll keep watch on that. The community, the One Wake, I think some of you are familiar with that coalition of faith-based organizations that have made up their presence here in Raleigh, similar to Durham Can. And so they kind of hit the ground running and have taken a position on that project. And I think will be instrumental in keeping watch over how that plays out.
Thank you. Yes, yes. What is the situation of senior housing in Raleigh?
There's a great demand because the population is aging and thankfully longer, right? And people are moving here because of all the weather and all the good reasons why we still live here, right? Mm-hmm. And the challenge too with seniors is that because now, as seniors, we're living on very limited, restricted income sources and, retirement funds that are dwindling. Mm-hmm. And so there's a need, and I'm also mindful of the fact that when we start talking about senior housing, people think it's folk just sitting around in rocking chairs, unfortunately. And we're talking active seniors, wherever you find yourself in life. And, when we say a senior community, it just simply means it's age restricted. We're targeting those at 55 and older, which I was like, I'm a senior, or 62 and older. And so we need more of it. And so you'll find in some developments or a given year, like for instance with DHIC, where maybe that's the only thing we're developing that year. But to be honest with you, for some communities, the only way that they will agree to an affordable housing development is if the development is serving seniors. They're not interested in family or non-age restricted communities in their quote unquote backyard. Mm-hmm. And so, we're building it as quickly as we can for everyone, but there is certainly a demand for more senior housing.
Okay, thank you. And
just to also note, for those reasons, those rents can't be but so high because we know seniors are living on very fixed incomes. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So what I said earlier, right? The only way you can realize the benefit in lower rents is by eliminating the debt that you carry on the property. And so I try to have conversations with people. They want to see, and I'll make this point. So if the argument is that the $80 million should be dedicated to everyone to those who are at 30 and 40% of the area median income, AMI, you effectually, if we were to do a development, DHIC were to do a development of 100 units, we couldn't raise enough in the rents or charge enough in the rents to cover and service the debt on the property. You have to have a mix of incomes. And when I say mix of incomes, I'm not talking about, 100%. Anywhere, for the most part, tax credits fund developments or fund units that are at 60% AMI and below. The tax credit program does allow for income averaging, where you can serve those slightly higher up to 80%, but in exchange, you need to serve those slightly lower, 30 and 40%. It's an offset. So those who are paying a little bit more in their income, even if it's in their rent, even if it's at 60%, are helping to pay for those units and offset the cost for those who are at 30 and 40%. It's a math equation. And I know that's not what people want to hear, but we would not even be able to get financing for a project. If we can't show that investor, how are we going to pay that investor back? And I'm not talking about the city of Raleigh. I'm talking about going to a bank and getting financing, right? And only way you do it is you have to show where you're bringing in the income, and that only source of income when you're working in affordable housing or multifamily is the rent.
Thank you. Big problems everywhere, right?
Yes.
Yes. I want to thank you so much. Does anybody else have any questions? I think the chat has been emptied, but again, I'd say more kudos to you is coming in. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. And I really do want to thank you all for inviting me. I think this invitation was extended earlier in the year, wasn't it?